I'd like to call this Finance Committee meeting to order at 7:04 p.m. And we'll start with the roll call.
Mr. Halpern?
Here.
Ms. Cohen?
Here.
Ms. Chuck?
Here. First off, before we go to our action items, I just welcome our new board members. It's great to have you here. We have a few action items and one major discussion item tonight around our financial projections, so we'll just dive right in. The first action item is approval of the minutes. The Finance Committee recommends that the minutes of the April 10, 2017 Board Finance Committee meeting be approved as presented. Can I have a second?
Second.
Are there any questions or amendments to the minutes that anyone saw? No? Okay. Well, then let's go ahead and take a vote.
Mr. Halpern?
Yes.
Ms. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Chuck?
Yes. Motion carries. The next action item is our food service satellite meals program approval, which we do every year at this time. I will read the motion and ask for a second, and then we'll open it up to discussion, and Mary can expand on what the motion is related to for our meal services programs across the district. So the motion is the Finance Committee recommends that the intergovernmental agreement allowing District 202 to provide District 65 schools with meals for the 27-18 school year be brought to the full board for approval. A second?
Yes.
Thanks.
I second.
Okay. So, and we can open up. Mary, did you want to?
Sure, I'll just do a general overview. This is the 21st year that we would have this relationship with the high school. They're literally a couple blocks down the street. So this is a very collaborative effort, and we're very appreciative to have their services. What they do is they provide a meal service for 10 of our elementary schools and Rhodes Magnet School. Those schools do not have full-size kitchens, so we can't prepare our own meals there. So it works well that the high school prepares these meals, and we send a driver over to pick up the meals and deliver them to our various schools. So it's again, the 21st year of this relationship, and it's working very well. They're proposing a 1% price increase, which is extremely modest for this year. So this is the time of year when we bring this contract to the board. It comes once a year. It's a 1-year term contract, and it's working very well. So we're happy to field any questions.
What questions do we have?
The conservative planner in me wants to know how much time would it take to find a vendor to replace this should the high school one day come back and say that we're not interested in renewing the agreement? And if the contract comes every May, is that enough time to fill the gap before the start of the following school year?
Well, we do talk with the high school before May arrives so that we know that they're interested in continuing. Obviously, they have staff and equipment on hand that serve the District 65 needs. I think realistically, we would probably want at least a couple months to put together a bid and go out for contractual service if we had an outside vendor provide the service for the district. So.
Okay. I love the positive relationship. I just
Yes.
didn't know if there was anything in the contract that says if we were to end the agreement, it would have to be by X date, just for our own safety.
Or, with all respect to the positive relationship, if the price point gets to a point that is so high, we should be nimble enough to go see what the competitive market would bring.
I think to that point, a similar question when was the last time this was brought up to bid, just in terms of being able to demonstrate to the community what value we are currently getting from the high school? You know,
I've been here 11 years, and I am not aware in that time that we've bid food service at all. So it's something that I don't know when it was bid last. Again, for 21 years, we've had the service and the relationship with the high school. I just want to take a moment and introduce our department director here. We have Kate Mason-Schultz sitting across the table from us. She not only oversees the District 65 meal service program, but also she handles the food service for the programs here out of JEH. So she's a very busy lady and very knowledgeable about food service. So I don't know when the last time is that we've bid.
It's an interesting question, and we can, I don't want to over-promise, but we could also poke around a little bit and see what other school districts are doing and what their costs are, and at least do a sort of informal benchmarking so we can, I mean, is that reasonable?
It's something that we can definitely look into. It was brought up as a question.
Bring the
to me earlier.
microphone.
It's something that we could look into pretty easily. It was something that was brought to my attention earlier in the year. I don't remember why for sure, but we did, kind of poke around with a few management companies. The one kind of stickler with using a management company is that they're not as willing to use your commodity dollars. So we are given commodity dollars from USDA, and that becomes kind of a sticky situation where the high school is very willing to use our commodities. So it's a positive, another positive of working with ETHS.
So it could be helpful in the future just to give a couple comp examples of what other districts are paying, because I think the contracts should be fairly readily available, as we have to make ours available. And then to your question, Joey, I did say, in the agreement, basically, notice of termination it's an 8-week notice of termination. So it does give a couple months, assuming they also start talking about this. Agree with that. We don't have a long period, but it gives 8 weeks, obviously in advance of signing it, which then looks, if we're doing it about the same time, would probably be in 4 months or so in advance of when we need it. So, is that, any other questions? Nope. Okay, well, let's go ahead and vote.
Mr. Halpern?
Yes.
Ms. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Chow?
Yes, motion carries 3-0. Our next item of action is the treasurer's bond renewal for fiscal year 18. This too, Mary or Kathy can explain what the treasurer's bond covers and why we have to do it, but it is a required activity each spring, as I recall. And there's information in your packet on page 13 about, and thereafter about the actual bond. So I'll read the motion and then we can second it and have comments. The Finance Committee recommends that the continuation of the treasurer's bond be presented to the full board for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. I'll open up for questions. We'll just trade back and forth on the second since there's so many people. Do you want to say anything?
I can just do a general
Describe it?
overview. Yes, thank you, Candace. So this is a annual requirement that comes before the board this time of year. So this bond covers the person who serves as the school treasurer. So I've served in that capacity for the past 11 years, but starting in July, Kathy Zalewski, our business manager, who also holds a CPA and a chief school business official endorsement from the state, will be taking over as the school treasurer. So we are required to have a bond that covers 25% of the cash on hand. And so you can see the math in the application, and it is required that we have this bond, and the amount is determined based on the cash on hand.
Any questions? Oh, sorry, Kathy.
Savings this year, the amount of the premium is, I believe, about 3,000 less.
For the bond?
For the bond.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that on the cost of issuing the bond or the?
Yeah, that's the
actual-
quote that we received, and not exactly if the quotes were more competitive, but it's costing us less, which is a good thing.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Okay, let's go ahead and vote.
Mr. Halpern?
Yes.
Ms. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Chow?
Yes, motion carries 3-0. So now we'll move into our discussion item, which it relates to the financial projections for fiscal year 18 through 25. And this too is something we do typically at this point and as a precursor to starting the budget process for the new fiscal year, so we have more updated projections. Obviously, you'll see in the materials also information related to the referendum, which is new to the projection, so we can look at how those monies are being spent and be in accordance with the resolution that we passed at the last board meeting. And so I will turn it over to Paul, Mary, and Kathy to tee up the presentation and talk to us a little bit about what's new in the projections and describe those as well as major changes that have happened relative to the last time some of us have seen these.
And I'll just start by thanking Mary and Kathy for pulling this information together. Projections are projections, and they're based on our best professional analysis of where we're at and where we're going, given many uncertainties. And so that's what is embedded in the presentation as we move forward. That said, our projections have been pretty spot on, not only over the last 3 years, but over the last 6 to 10 years. I mean, we haven't been, off by much as we've been moving forward. And so that's to the credit of our analysts and how we move forward and how we gauge out what the expenses are, and, given the threats and uncertainties that we have. So with that, let me turn over to Kathy.
Thank you, Dr. Barr. So typically our projections are 5-year projections that we do, but because of the referendum, these projections are for the next 7 years, and they are based on assumptions, and as Dr. Gordon said, these assumptions change. So again, this is not written in stone. This will change. It will probably change next time you look at these projections during the time when we adopt the budget. But that's how things are looking today. Let me start with some financial highlights. Obviously, with the most important one, on April 4th, our voters passed the operating rate referendum, and the district will, with an 80% approval rate, and the funds will start trickling in fiscal year 18. Also in April of this year, the board adopted a resolution which will provide the guidance on spending, referendum spending, and also on covering future budget deficits. So we can be deficit-free through fiscal year 25. We also have some not so good financial news tonight. A few weeks ago, we were notified kind of through informal channels from the state that the state is projecting to pay only 50% of the categorical payments scheduled to be paid in fiscal year 17. Well, that's almost $4 million for us, which, and you will see it in the presentation, unfortunately will put us in a deficit position for fiscal year 17. We are not in it alone. This affects everyone, every single public school district in Illinois. And 12%, 11% of our funds come from state funding. So we are being affected.
Can I add in on that? So we typically get 4 payments, and so we're only going to get 2 payments. And that with the sense that we will get the other 2 payments in next fiscal year, starting July 1. And that's important to recognize. The worry I have in the world of uncertainties is that is a question of, will the state really come through with those 2 payments they should have paid this fiscal year next year? All signals are yes, but given the budget impasse, the legislative impasse, the political impasse in Springfield, there's no guarantee. So that's just, it's a big red flag for us, and yet we have to proceed moving forward.
Absolutely, we have no certainty that it will be paid. I mean, we are planning on these payments being received. That's what I heard from Tim Imler from the state, that the payment should come on after June 30th, but really nobody knows. I mean, that's really...
And it's not just us, it's districts across the state, including ETHS, District 202 ETHS. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
So this chart just illustrates our dependence on local revenues, and you can see post-referendum, our lion's share of our property revenues come from property taxes, 77%, and then 11% comes from the state. The portion that's really at risk in fiscal year 17, not fiscal 18, because that's another story with general state aid, that's approximately 7% of our budget. So next couple of slides, let me just briefly go through the major assumptions for revenues and expenditures. And I also want to point out what has changed between the projections that we presented during the referendum period when we were presenting information on the referendum. So first of all, we know that property taxes, the growth in property taxes is subject to tax cap law, which means that we can only receive 5% or the CPI, whichever is less. And if you look at that graph, all the blue bars show the actual CPI. You can see that basically CPI factor, except for last year, has been under 2% during last 5 years. So our chances of getting anything, over 2% are basically very slim. That's why we use a 1.5% going forward for our levies 18 and on. This information is presented on calendar basis, and it works with a delay. So what it means, the CPI for 2015, 0.7%, will be felt. We will be feeling that increase, which is very small, next year. It's being used for 2016 levy, which is received in fiscal year 18, and so on. So 2.1 CPI, which was known in January, it was not in our referendum materials, that became known on January 16. The information got updated. It will help us in the future. It will create result in additional revenues, but this is new information that will help our projections, but we really don't know what's going to happen in the future. And as you can see, the trend is downward. So going back to property taxes, additional things that we are including at the TIFs. We have TIF dollars, Howard Hartree, and Washington National in fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 20. And we also have the referendum dollars, of course, including the projections. And the amount actually that will be coming in fiscal year 18 is 1.5% of the amount that 1.5 times of the 14.5 amount. So we will be receiving about 22 million in that year, and then it's because of how the dollars are distributed by the county clerk. We changed our assumptions for corporate personal replacement tax. This revenue is being cut by the state constantly, so there is no increase going forward. With local revenues, there's some good news. We are budgeting for TIF payment next year from the city, about $370,000. And we also will be receiving local grant to fund some of our central office positions. We're actually doubling our investment income revenue, which is amazing because we used to receive $1.5 million. I think the peak was in 2006, and now it's barely 100,000. So as you can imagine, we lost $1.5 million every single year. So we can see a movement there. So we will be adding about 50,000 to our budget. General state aid, again, the future is very uncertain. We're not prorating this revenue source any longer. I think the state realized that proration really hurt the poorest school districts. I think they're really working on a solution, but I know we've been talking about it for at least 3 years, and there is really no a bill. I mean, there's a Senate Bill 1. There's just variety of different things proposed, but nothing got passed. State categorical. Again, we are planning because of the 2 late payments in fiscal year 17. We are tentatively planning for 6 payments for next year, but we will be listening and seeing if there's any additional information from the state, and we will adjust the budget accordingly. Federal aid, 2.5% increase. We are planning for additional Medicaid dollars due to efficiencies that we implemented, and because of the proposed expansion of the Head Start program. We don't know if the full-day program will be approved, but if it will be, and I think we'll know at the end of June, there will be additional dollars, but also additional expenditures.
And again, a sidebar we can come back to as the administration in Washington, D.C. moves forward, the certainty or uncertainty around Medicaid is a big issue. So as we have been doing really important, diligent work to recoup Medicaid expenditures, and our staff have been working long hours to do this, we'll continue to do so, but we don't know what the future of the program is.
Moving to expenditures. Just looking at that pie chart, I mean, you can see that 83% of our operating budget pays for the cost of staffing, salaries, and benefits. And even of the non-personnel portion, there's a large percentage that goes through things like the special education tuition, so there's not much wiggle room. Salaries, employee salaries include the latest salary agreements. They also include additional positions that we added, like the 19 FTEs due to additional planning period. And that's the reason why the overall cost of salaries next year is decreasing by 4.5%. It's mainly due to these additional positions. We also adding two reading specialists, one bilingual teacher due to programmatic needs. We also have fewer retirements that we initially projected. Our typical number is 11. We only got 5 certified retirements, so less savings. In the out years, we are again, these are not to be met with individual unions, but the overall cost of salaries to increase by 3.5%. Employee benefits, the major change between now and the November projection is the savings that we will be realizing from the renewal of our health insurance. Instead of 5%, it's only 1%, so substantial savings, $350,000. We no longer pay for the ERL, early retirement options, which sunset in 2016. That's $800,000 each year that we will not be spending. So that is a major saving for the district. Pension cost shift, it's in the projections. We had it in projections for a while. It's another thing that we'll be watching and see if there is a legislation. If it's not, we will not put it in our final budget, but for now, we would like to have it in the budget, so we are not surprised. And the first year, 0.5% is about $350,000. Purchase services, as you can see, there is a little bit of fluctuation in the percentage, and it's because of a budget tool that we used for years. I'm sure the committee heard us for years talking about prepayments, trying to balance the budget. It's because if we have a surplus, we take these dollars and we prepay next year's expenses. But at the end, these expenses fluctuate. So that's why you see a 15% increase, because we are putting back some of the premiums back on the books.
And we're no longer prepaying.
And we're no longer prepaying. Supplies do include new expenditure. Well, it's not new. It was in the projections in November, $550,000 for textbook adoption, and I believe we're going to be talking about it later on in the working board meeting. Capital outlay, very small amount in our budget. We are planning to put back vehicle replacement cost in fiscal year 20. Other objects, that's the cost of special education tuition, and this is a cost in our budget, and you will see in the table that I'm about to show you that's really increasing because it's very hard to control that cost. I mean, the cost itself is going up every year, but we added, I believe, 4 or 5 students, I'm not sure, Joyce, if I have that number correct, of students that we put in out of district placements. And some of these places, the tuition could be as high as $100,000 a year for one student. This is a copy of the resolution that I mentioned in the highlights that our board approved in April, and it's going to guide our referendum spending. And we are not done. We're going to be working on policies in the future. But for now, we just want to make sure that besides staying deficit-free through to fiscal year 25, we can ensure our investments in small class sizes, our curriculum, our investments in equity and our intensive program supports for our students, social emotional learning, technology for students and staff, as well as other services to our students and community partners. We also will be doing some of our capital building projects that were delayed for years, like the double vestibule entrances in 5 of our schools. We will be doing 2 magnet schools during summer of 18, and then Orrington, Lincolnwood, and Washington in summer of 2019.
And I know you went through it fast. The resolution with the board approved is helping to govern the expenses as we build a budget for next year, and it's basically on our bulletin board staring us in the eye as we do our financial management.
So in addition, just going back to the guidelines included in the resolution, we also going to be contributing to our fund balance. Our goal is to contribute $1 million a year. As you know, our fund balance is very low. It's barely 20%, way below the recommended 25 to 40 range, which has been hurting our rating. We have been downgraded. We also will be paying for our technology from our operating funds. We currently, until now, we've been paying for our iPad leases with bonds that we pay off for 20 years. I mean, and these iPads live for 3 or 4 years, but the district did not have any other options before. So now we have that opportunity thanks to our voters. And we also will be increasing our investment in reading specialists and increasing investment in one-to-one programs. We'll be purchasing iPads, and Stacey, I believe we will be doing a pilot in our remaining middle schools. And then if the assumptions hold and we have funds available, we will be doing scheduled and additional building improvements.
One friendly amendment, not a pilot, will be funding the one-on-one technology in our remaining middle schools, right?
So this table, I didn't realize it would be that bright, but it shows a lot has changed this year because there was a lot of information in our budget that was estimated. But I just wanted to show you how this current year is projecting to end because it will affect next year. So originally we were projecting a balanced budget, a small surplus, 73,000. We know it's not going to happen because of the delayed state categorical payments. Actually the variance in the revenue is a little bit less. It's about 3.3 million, and because we are getting additional revenues, but we are hoping to collect these revenues in fiscal year, these 2 late payments, fiscal year 18. There's also a variance with expenditures, but it's a positive one. We will be underspending our expenditures, primarily because of the savings from negotiations. These savings are actually higher. They're about 1.5 million, but we will have, because we're still in May, additional special education tuition expenditures beyond our budget, which will cut into our savings. So overall, we will be ending with a deficit. We'll be cutting into our fund balance, but we will be repaying ourselves next year. And that's what the slide shows. I understand it's very hard to read. There is a table in your packet. So this is a summary of our high-level summary of our projections. And besides regular revenues and expenditures, you can see additional items that were included in our projections. Capital technology, pension cost shift, contribution to the fund balance. As I'm not sure if you can see, but this first year, fiscal year 18, instead of $1 million, there is a 3.2 almost, because we are paying ourselves for the deficit in fiscal year 17. You can see that there is 1.25 million of contributions in capital projects. We have referendum-funded education initiatives. These are the reading specialists and the one-to-one iPads, as well as the reserves that we will be putting aside to manage future deficits. So the takeaway from this slide is that we are projecting to be in the black without using the reserves through fiscal year 21. And again, some of these things, like the pension cost shift, may not materialize, or something else can happen. We will start using the reserves to stay in the black, starting with fiscal year 22. Sorry, went too fast. And that's what this table is showing. This is basically last 3 rows of the previous table, just magnified. So you can see these surpluses, very small surpluses, after taking all these expenditures and the reserves in account. And then we are using our reserves, starting with fiscal year 22, to eliminate these future deficits. So we are projecting right now, using the assumptions that we know, which we also know will change slightly, to be deficit free through FY25. Our goal actually is to stretch it, to go beyond fiscal year 25, because this scenario doesn't really assume anything. It doesn't assume any reductions, it's just basically on autopilot. All what we know right now projected to the future.
It does assume $400,000 in increased reductions each year.
Yes, it
though,
does.
Correct?
Yes, it does.
So
Yes,
it
it
doesn't
does.
assume exactly what's happening today. It assumes efficiencies that we had
Yes, and
already-
these efficiencies
built in.
will be
Right.
implemented in FY18 budget and will stay there. And hopefully we can even achieve more efficiencies. And this is basically the same information, but kind of shows you the reserves that we will be able to accumulate, the bars on the left, and apply towards these deficits. And we realize it's a difficult concept because that distribution is not even. We will be getting more money at the beginning, and then as our expenditures, as our budget grows, we will be spending it. But again, this is the same message that was shared during the meetings that Dr. Gorin had. We feel we're going to be deficit-free at least through fiscal year 25. Again, this is same information, linear form. We feel confident that is very doable. We've been talking a lot about our fund balance recently because our fund balance is just too low. It's too low, and we've been warned many times by Moody's. You know, you have to work on your fund balance, otherwise you're gonna basically be downgraded again. And I think the influx of referendum revenues will allow us to improve, repair our fund balance the portion of the bar in the green is the reserve. It's the reserve that unfortunately will be used and eventually will be spent down. So we are hoping to not go below the red line, which is the 25%. That's the 25% trend line. But using the information, these projections looks like we're going to be spending down and again going to under 25%. But again, we hope that we can do things between now and fiscal year 25 to stay above 25% percentage. There are still a lot other uncertainties. There's at least, I mentioned briefly, these additional Senate and House bills, because I personally feel that these delayed payments are a prelude to something bigger to come. And if that happens, we're not going to be the winners, because the state does consider us a property wealthy district. We're going to be losing funds. And the information that we brought to the Finance Committee last year, had these estimates. We're going to be losing maybe not 6.7 million on day one, but it's going to be phased in. And it will amount to probably 30 million over the next 4 years.
And we were property wealthy regardless of the outcome of the referendum.
Correct. We don't know, again, we don't know the future of the CPI factor. We don't know what's going to happen with the labor contracts, and who knows what's going to happen with federal funding. So there's just so many unknowns, but this is how it's looking today with the information that we have today. And it really looks optimistic, I think. It looks really very different to what we've been projecting for so many years. So I feel really good about next year's budget and what we can accomplish as a district. Any questions? That's all I have.
Thank you. Now let's open it up to questions and comments and questions for clarification too, since both my colleagues are the first time going through this. So please, for information or anything, that if something doesn't make sense. I actually have a couple questions relative to clarification of language, but so I'll let you guys go first. Lindsay?
Yeah, I have a few quick questions, I think. So when we're looking at the funds to be used for referendum purposes, I think that you were saying that was the reading specialists and iPads, but that number doesn't look like it increases.
This number doesn't.
The number, it looks like on the projections it doesn't increase year over year, but the reading specialists would be getting raises.
Right. It's really more a placeholder because we don't have the exact estimates. I mean, yes. I mean, if we hire these reading specialists, there will be an incremental cost. But I mean, I don't feel it's going to make a difference because again, this is projections. This is high level, a little bit more high level than the actual budget. But when we build the budget, there will be actual cost included and maybe slightly different.
I think it probably would be helpful to say that of that $1,025,000, I believe, Stacy, correct me if I'm wrong, but almost 900,000 of that, 800 and some thousand?
875.
875 are the iPads, which wouldn't, or is the technology. The $1,025,000 in that line item actually includes reading specialists, which would be the
150?
two. Is a small portion of the total million. 875,000 are the costs of the one-to-one technology that's being augmented and brought into operating versus, am I not making sense?
No, that makes sense. I'm curious as to, we're buying new iPads every year?
No.
So what we will do, it's, so essentially what we will do is the iPads will go on basically a 3-year rotation. And so we'll buy a third of the technology annually. The money that's included in that line does include the money necessary for professional learning. It does include some additional for instructional technology coaches, equipment. So it's an all-in
more than just
cost
the
to
iPads.
lift the program.
Okay, understood. Thank you. The other question I have is around the CPI, it being estimated at 1.5. When in the past 16 years, it looks like 11 of those years were well above 1.5, and only 5 were at 1.5 and below. And that obviously, a big swing in that would make a major difference in our revenues coming in. Every point is another $1.5 million, right? So where does that 1.5 come from?
It's an average. It's, I don't remember, it's a 5-year or it's a 10-year average that we calculate. And we actually, the percentage that we've used in the past was higher, but it was changed, was lowered because of the recent trend, which, again, we had a lot of years under 2%.
When I first landed, which is 3 years ago, we were estimating at 2%.
2%.
And 2.5 before. So this has changed. The estimates changed as we move forward. And if you just take from 2009 on, I mean, you have the bump in 2011 of 3, but there's basically a downward trend after the recession in 2009. Sure. And so that's where we, and this is best practices according to some of our
and we also
consultants.
work with our financial advisor, PMA, and we run these assumptions through them, and we often listen to their recommendations, especially on assumptions like that.
You know, the bump up at 2.1, lots of economists are arguing this is based on the new administration, this is based on the stock market going up, et cetera, et cetera. We don't know what's real and what's not. And without even being political, we don't know what's real or not. And so the safer way to estimate is 1.5. If again, the CPI goes up and matches 2.1 or is higher, then we would have to see what the consultants say, see what other districts are doing, and then come back.
Thank you.
And we actually have plenty of time to adjust that information because, I mean, we know the CPI for for fiscal year 19. So this is really 3 years out.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Anyone else have questions?
I do. Can you break down the 19 additional FTEs for planning time by K-5 and 6th grade?
Stacy, can you?
So what I do know is for the K-5, what we're looking at is approximately 8 FTEs in order to put in the 5th period planning. And these are estimates because we still are finalizing the staffing model. So that's, I know, a piece of it, but we can certainly look it up and bring the full numbers.
Okay, because it's just that the numbers when we negotiated were lower for the planning time, so I was surprised to see the 19. And do you have an idea on the total number of FTEs for DEC for next year? So we're at 715 this year. I know we're losing 2 grant positions. If you're then adding 19, are we looking 30s, 730s?
I only know the numbers that I know.
Actually adding,
Yeah, there's 1.5 reading specialists.
We can check with
FTEs for planning periods.
but we're adding 22 positions.
Sorry?
22 positions, 22 FTEs, because
So you're
we-
adding 22 because of
22.
the other 3?
Yes.
Enrollment.
Right, but then I was thinking, were any lost? Because I knew 2 were lost due to a grant position.
Because we have 2 reading specialists and 1 bilingual due to enrollment.
Due to enrollment.
So then, and how many were lost due to enrollment?
I'm sorry.
Due to enrollment, how many?
In bilingual student population, we adding 1,
right.
and then we have 2 reading specialists,
So
and
it's
then
like
19 due to planning period.
So the assumption is 18 plus 2 plus 1 is what you just said.
19 plus 2 plus 1.
19.
19 plus 2 plus 1.
So
22.
22, added to 715, so next year we'd be thinking 737?
If all those are
If all
DEC
those.
categories.
That's actually what I had written down. And my other question is, why do you think that only 5 teachers put in for retirement for this school year? Because that's a very low number.
Could it be because the early retirement incentive lapsed in 2016?
last year or something.
Could it be because
We did
there's
the
no incentive, right?
There's no
No incentive.
incentive.
The incentive program is no longer, or at least for this year wasn't, given our financial situation at the time. We would have had to make the decision on that. We had no visibility into whether we would have funding for an incentive program. So I think that's something, to look at again going forward now that we're in a different situation and look at the benefit of that. And so we can follow up on the one-to-one, on the 19 FTEs, 8 versus, is it really the additional 11 in middle school or not? One other question for follow-up, or at least maybe a future meeting, would be to have some time to talk more, and you probably already thought about this, but have some time to talk more about the one-to-one rollout, what's anticipated for 17-18. We have the full amount of the money in 17-18, but I would expect that there's going to be kind of a process to get to spending that money.
We're working on a work plan right now.
Okay.
If that's not redundant, but the work plan is being developed at this point in time to make sure that we have a solid plan, evaluate what, begin to train, begin to bring things along so that we're ready for a full launch the following week.
Okay. So we can
Yeah, we
slate
can
that
go
to
into
talk
that
about it at a
another-
working board or
another-
finance, which
Certainly.
board of finance.
You also may want to, for our new board members, bring back and share the memo you wrote about technology expenses writ large with all the orange and red and warning signs. Because what the referendum passage does is move us into a really positive state that would be worthwhile for you all to see.
And one of the things we will bring forward, and I need to take a look at which board meeting, but it will be before the end of June, is a general purchasing plan to do some of the refurbishment and replenishment of technology in the near term. So we do plan on bringing that forward, and I can also bring forward kind of some of the initial sketches of the one-to-one plan.
Great. I actually had a couple other questions that didn't get raised. So I'll start with the biggest one, or probably the most important, the biggest to make sure we're all clear on. In the PowerPoint on page 14, the one you just went through, in terms of I just want to make sure we're clear on what these things mean now that we're looking at new numbers. Reserves used to manage future deficits. Does that mean operating reserve? Does that mean any of the money that we're receiving from the referendum monies?
Right, the referendum reserve. So I will change
Change
the language here. I'll make it
Okay. So what I'm confused about then is in 17-18, we have revenue minus expenditures of 22 million. So that's based at the very top in the first green line. 22 million is what we expect we're getting in because we're getting in more than the 14 and a half. We're getting in 1.5, more. So that's actually the referendum amount of money we're getting in,
Yes.
correct? But we're setting aside 14.4. So we are spending some of it.
Yes, we are.
So I guess I'm not understanding if it's reserves used to manage future deficits, it should be, we've used 7.6 of it, 14.4 is the reserve set aside to manage future
Want to
deficits.
see both numbers side by side so we can see what we're spending of the referendum and what's put aside?
Yeah, this should be a 7.6, right? If it's used, we've used 7.6 million, not zero in the first year. Correct? Am I,
Yeah, I guess what I was.
or what is that supposed to mean?
Trying to show here is that these are the future amounts that will be used in the future years, because in next year, we're gonna have the money to balance the budget. We're not gonna be borrowing money from other years. So-
Correct.
But maybe that's not
Okay.
clear here.
Well, I think we just have to, it's not, just have to be careful because we are using reserves.
Yes, we are.
We are using referendum money. We're using 7.6 million of it. So
On current expenditures.
it's
Yes.
not to manage the future, to manage the future deficits.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't use money in the current year to manage future deficits.
So you're asking for a line of referendum use.
Yeah, how much have we used from the referendum
We can add
monies,
that.
and then what's
Yeah.
left over? I think.
Yeah, that's good feedback.
Of
Just
the
be easier
22,
to
how much is
understand.
being used, how much is being set aside?
Yeah, so I think 14.4 we're setting aside, I mean, 7.6 we're using in that first year. And
show
then what
that
are we
we are
using in the next,
using-
yeah,
yeah.
just so we know, we're
The
not
second year
using
it's about 6
zero.
million.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I guess I see the
So the-
reserve used to manage future deficits.
So we can,
That year's deficits, it's not really future deficits, it's,
So we'd have to have a separate line item. Tell referendum.
we can,
what does reserved used to manage future deficits mean? So in 21, 22, we're using 1.3 million
Of the
of
money
the
we
reserves
saved.
we already had
Right.
to manage the
So
deficit.
those
Got
last
it.
4 years from the reserves used to manage future deficits
It goes
could balance out to the first 4 years of reserves set
Right.
aside to manage future deficits.
net 3 million, because we have 3
Right.
Pretty
million
much,
left
and I
over.
think that's what.
Net the 3 million.
so we need to clarify that.
Just,
And-
just language, I think, I get now what it's saying, but I think it's hard.
Well,
If I don't understand it, probably a lot
It
of
should be
people wouldn't
user-friendly, and then what
Yeah.
Joey said too, is just sort of thinking the logic of the $22 million that are coming in, referendum dollars of 17, 18, how much will be used and how much will be put into,
So we have the 14.4 is going to be put into reserve. It's just the 7.6 is what we're
Yeah,
using.
we can
I just
absolutely
would hope.
that's good feedback.
Thanks. Then I have a couple more detailed questions. One is, there's a 10% decrease in local revenues for FY18.
Yes.
Where do we think that's coming from?
It's coming from the TIF surplus payment from City of Evanston that is in FY18 budget, but then it drops off. We don't know if we're going to be getting it. So that's why you see a decrease.
Okay, so that's one that we.
That's almost 400,000.
Right, right. We don't put it in until, at what point?
We know, yeah,
Okay.
like, we had conversations with the city, but we waited, we wanted to be absolutely sure, and after we were assured by the city's CFO, then we decided, the decision was made to include it, but again, that's a lot of money,
Okay.
so we have to be sure.
And then just clarifying, the 2 additional reading specialists, is that individuals being brought back with the referendum funds, or is that for increment, it says due to program, it says due to increased enrollment. Is that on top of
So,
that
no,
restoration?
The 2, there's 1.5 that is the referendum funds, and then in the bumping of people in order pre-referendum, there was actually a 0.5 that existed that was bumped out because a 0.5 person took a bump to 1.0. So it gets us back to, it's essentially where we are now plus 1.5, but we had to restore a 0.5 that got lost in the process.
Okay, so it's not incremental addition
It's-
on top
it's
of the
making
restoration.
sure that every school has a
As
minimum of 1.0 reading
Got
specialists,
it.
and that's
Okay,
what we need to
that's what that does. Great, thank you. I think that was, then there's one little item, in one slide, I don't know where it was, you talked about additional revenues coming to offset, grants to offset central office. I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit.
Sure. That's, we've got 2 grants, one from the Sebring Lewis Foundation, one from the Spencer Foundation, which is a national foundation on research. And these are parts of the Northwestern, District 202, District 65 consortium, if we want to call that, to do work around building an analytic infrastructure to be able to understand the extent to which our children and our students are excelling or on track in their work, and then connecting that with 202. It also connects our Northwestern colleagues to us in terms of having researchers who will be working at the district doing questions of concern that we have, and it provides for staffing at the central office level, at the senior level. It offsets some cabinet level positioning, and it offsets some of our analysts as well. And we're
And a
just
multi-year agreement?
that's a multi-year. It's a 2 years, and then we're having meetings with the Northwestern folks, 202 folks, and us in a week's time, 2 weeks' time, to actually apply for another grant that's out there that looks very parallel to this from another foundation. And then there's ongoing work. A lot of this work is embedded in the office of David Figlio, who was the head of the Institute for Policy Research and now is the dean of the School of Education and Social Policy. So we're trying to capitalize on this and then think about where there are other funding opportunities in the future.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for asking.
Anyone else have questions or comments?
I have.
Oh, sorry.
No,
No,
that's
you
okay.
did.
No, just a quick question to try to understand a little bit more the implication of the not getting the 2 payments this year, and we're assuming that we'll get 6 payments next year. But if we don't, so that's causing us to go 2 million in deficit. I guess I'm trying to figure out if we don't get those payments, what is that going to look like? How is that going to change the projections going forward?
Well, just to be clear, that because we're not getting the 2 payments, we are going into the fund balance.
Right.
And our expectation is that we will pay ourselves back because we have the revenues. But that said, what's the ramifications?
Well, I just want to say that that would be the first if we don't get that money, because state was late in the past. They do all kinds of pattern. They pay 1, we usually get 4, but they always pay. And I believe in 2008, there was 1 year when they only paid 3. In the following year, we received 5 payments. And actually, coincidentally, that was the year for which we got the recognition from the state. So I'll be very surprised if that money disappears, because it would have to be, right now it's just a timing, right? But that's a different story. If it disappears, I just politically, I don't know how that would play. I heard that U46 is saying that if they don't get the money, they're not going to be able to open the door in the fall. There was a letter signed by Dr. Gorin and 400 other superintendents sent to the state. Again, I just don't think it's going to happen, but if it doesn't, District 65 is in this lucky situation that we have reserves to cover that deficit. But I personally think it will.
It's a really important question, and that becomes an important question politically as board members, as administrators, on how we collectively put our voice and the voice of the other 800 school districts out there. And so I think we have to be absolutely diligent on watching what happens, because the backroom stuff, the grand bargain, whatever those discussions are. As Kathy said, there's a coalition of superintendents who have signed not only a petition, but have started sort of an activist movement to be able to say, we want budget now. I think EdRed is a place where we should be paying attention to. And then as this board, as our colleagues across the way at 202 will work on this. We're not in this alone, but it will have a ramification. And again, just underscoring what Kathy said, many of the district superintendents who signed have basically said they won't open in August because they won't go into that level of deficit spending. So that will just rev up the politic around all of this.
And then just in terms of our fund balance, it obviously is going significantly up over the next several years before it dips back down underneath the recommended. I know that things are bond rating and such. What, if any, effect should that fluctuation? Are we going to see all of a sudden? Is there any effect of it going up and then down again?
Could we see
just
lower interest rates for some time for capital?
Well, it's primarily it's the
that way?
ISB rating, right? Then we have the Moody's, but I don't worry so much about these ratings. I worry a lot about us having enough money to cover our expenditures. If something does happen with the state, do we have enough money to get through 3 months? We spend about 7 or 8 million a month. We need to have at least 4 months worth of in our fund balance to basically because otherwise the option will be to go to the local bank and borrow the money and pay probably high interest on the money. So that's my fear, to have enough money in the bank to meet payrolls and other.
And I join you with that fear, so that's actually really solid. And another friendly amendment, I actually think it actually does help our bond rate, it will help our bond rating, and that means that our capital borrowing costs will go down, which will then help us because we'll have more resources available to do what we want to do in an operating sense. Even as we proceed, where they're in the green section of that graph where there's a substantial increase in our fund balance, best practice says that you should have between 25 and 40% of your operating budget in a fund balance. And I don't know if we know at the peak of maximizing our referendum dollars before we spend them in the out years. I would place a bet that we're not at 40% of our fund balance. 39. So we're still within the band. And again, that was part of a discussion that the board had as we were moving forward on figuring out the costs of what should be the referendum price, which is what happens in the great situation where we had a large surplus. We're going to still be within the band of best practices of what a fund balance should be. And then our job as the resolution, which is in fine print in here, says, but the resolution basically says our job as fiscal stewards is to manage that over the next 8 years, so that it's not just the 8 years, it's year 9 and year 10, et cetera.
So related to that, at what point, so this summer, we've already done bonds, but when we go to our, to issue bonds for next summer, that would be at the time at which we'd be able to determine whether having $37 million in reserves versus 23, what effect what effect that could have on the bond rating, and ergo what effect that could have on our, our cost of buying, of borrowing,
Borrowing, yeah.
Well, they really look at the annual financial report. So if we go this summer, that's not going to change much because they will be looking at our reserves at the end. From this past year. It will change in the following.
So it would be for the 1920 years.
But just to clarify, with the passing of the referendum, we now have some dollars allocated to capital projects. So we are going to be able to schedule the remaining secure entrances, the double vestibule entrances at the 5 remaining buildings, summer 18 and summer 19. We don't need to sell bonds. We have referendum dollars to fund that. Going forward in the future, once that is done, we will be able to do small scope roof replacements and masonry replacements, and we may combine 2 years of those funds to do a larger project. So I don't see the need to sell bonds in the immediate future. Yes, our financial rating should go up the more cash we have in the bank, but we are still a long way before being able to access current year debt service dollars. We are still 20 years in the future. So I would not recommend we go sell bonds next year or the year after. I think with the referendum dollars, we'll be able to do the immediate capital needs, and the roofing architect comes every year to reassess, and the building and grounds department is very familiar with where those needs are. So we'll be able to use these referendum dollars very efficiently and effectively to meet the highest priority needs and avoid selling bonds for hopefully some time.
Okay, all right, thank you. Anything else? Okay. Thank you all very much. That was
And thank you
very
for your
helpful.
questions. Those are helpful. We'll adjust.
Well, the only other thing we have are the FYI items. If there are any questions on those, you can certainly forward them to the team, or we can have them now. Okay. All right. Then, with no further business, I find this meeting adjourned at 8:09 p.m.